Before diving into this incredible story, consider subscribing to the channel and hitting the bell. Every story here has something to say, and you won't want to miss a single one. The sky was gray over Detroit, heavy with low clouds, as if the sky itself were buckling under the weight of winter despair. The icy wind rushed between the buildings, whistling through the empty alleys, and cut the skin like a thin blade, impervious to the pain of passers-by. Each gust seemed to want to tear the last shreds of warmth from the body. And yet, in this February cold, Grace Turner, 35, walked with a determined, almost automatic step, dragging two small, bundled-up figures behind her. She held Emily and Chloe's hand, her treasures, her strength, her reason to move forward. 8-year-old Emily's cheeks were flushed and chapped, despite the knitted scarf Grace had made for her from an old sweater. She shuffled slightly, tired from a night without heat. Beside her, 5-year-old Chloe clutched a small, faded teddy bear, missing an eye, tightly to her chest. It was all she had left of her father. She refused to part with it, even to sleep. Grace's coat, once black, had turned gray with fatigue and time. Too thin for the biting winter. She could feel the wind seeping under her clothes, chilling her arms, seeping into her bones. But she didn't complain. She had learned to ignore her own pain long ago. In the inside pocket, she had slipped her last $7.50. It was all she owned. No credit card, no savings, no aid slip. Just this meager crumpled bill and a few worn coins. She hoped it would be enough to buy a baguette, maybe something for the girls. Not for herself. Her stomach had been empty since yesterday, but it didn't matter. Nothing else mattered. Not even his own hunger. Since the sudden death of her husband Daniel 3 years earlier, a construction worker who fell from poorly secured scaffolding, Grace had battled life storms alone. Daniel was everything to her, her love, her pillar of strength, her dream for the future. He had no life insurance or inheritance to leave behind, just a loving wife and 2 little girls who would always wait for him at the window, in vain. Since that tragic day, Grace hadn't had a single day of respite. She had improvised as mother, father, nurturer, protector, and silent warrior. She would get up at 4:30 a.m., walk to the bus stop, and cross the city to clean the polished floors of luxury office towers while the powerful were still asleep. Then she would move on to housekeeping in downtown hotels, then iron shirts for wealthy families who called her by her first name but knew nothing about her. Every day was a struggle against time, against the cold, against exhaustion. But above all, against that insidious poverty, which didn't scream, which didn't strike, but which gnawed away. A silent and constant poverty, like a faithful shadow clinging to her heels. Always there. Always heavy. That morning, her fridge was almost empty. There was only a little milk, some butter scraped from the bottom of a jar the day before, and 3 slices of stale bread. The girls had shared a bowl of warm milk diluted with water. And that was it. No cereal. No jam. Just the promise of a rumbling stomach. And yet, despite this daily misery, Grace held her head high. Not out of pride, but out of necessity. She didn't want her daughters to grow up in shame. She wanted to teach them that even without means, one could walk with dignity, speak gently, and dream without trembling. But that morning, something inside her had changed. An instinct. A fatigue that was no longer just physical, but spiritual. She no longer wanted to survive. She wanted a moment of respite. A simple moment of peace and warmth for her daughters. So she decided to dare. Just once. On 6th Avenue, at the foot of a glass and steel building reflecting the gray morning clouds, stood a small shop with a singular, almost timeless appearance. Among the cold, modern facades of the business district, it stood out. Le Pain D'Or, written in golden cursive letters on a varnished wooden sign, seemed straight out of another world. Grace Turner had been walking past it for months. Every time she took her daughters to the city park or returned from cleaning, her eyes instinctively fell on the front. And each time, she simply stared, like gazing at an unattainable dream. The windows glittered with perfectly aligned pastries, crispy buttery croissants, braided brioches with pearl sugar, golden rustic loaves, apple turnovers glistening with icing, and at the very bottom, a row of baguettes with light, crisp crusts, arranged like works of art. Grace had never dared to enter. Too chic. Too expensive. Too far removed from her reality. The kind of place where you immediately feel you don't have the codes, the attire, or the money to feel like you belong there. But that morning, something inside her gave way. Or maybe it was something inside her that stood up. The hunger in his daughter's eyes. The cold that had refused to leave them. The silence of their stomachs this morning. So, despite the shame lurking in her throat, she pushed open the door. A small, discreet chime rang. The warm air of the bakery immediately enveloped them, laden with the comforting scent of fresh bread, vanilla, and melted chocolate. A true cocoon, where the outside world seemed to no longer exist. Emily looked up, mouth open, marveling at the colorful pastries behind the glass. Chloe, clutching her bear, moved closer to her mother as if to reassure herself that it was real. Grace, on the other hand, felt as if she had entered a forbidden place. She instinctively looked down, embarrassed by her wet boots, her frozen fingers, her worn clothes. The contrast was striking between her and the customers in well-tailored suits, the women with leather bags, and the students absorbed in their laptops. In the background, near the large bay window, a lone man was sipping coffee from a white porcelain cup. He wore a long, charcoal-colored wool coat, his graying hair was neatly styled, and a brown leather watch graced his wrist. He was calm, collected, as if observing the world through a different lens. When Grace entered, he looked up. He didn't see a poor woman. He saw a mother. A warrior. A tired but dignified figure. And in the eyes of the little girls, he saw something that cannot be bought, pure, raw, untouched wonder. Grace tentatively walked over to the counter. Her gaze fell on a small basket beside the cash register. A sign read, "Leftovers from yesterday, $1.50. There was only one baguette left, a little harder, but still golden. She slipped her hand into her pocket, closed her fingers around her few coins, and felt them cold against her palm. "Hello. Is this wand still available?" she asked in a low, almost trembling voice. The cashier, a young woman with a polite but distracted smile, nodded. But before she could even take the bread, the man at the back of the room stood up. He approached quietly, without pretension. He made a discreet gesture toward the saleswoman, who recognized him immediately. She nodded silently. This gesture was the sign he sometimes made, to settle, without show, to offer, without imposing. He pointed to some pastries in the window. "Add 2 brioches, 4 croissants, and a loaf of fresh bread." "I'll take it." Grace turned around, stunned. She looked at him, confused, almost worried. "No. Sir, I can't accept this. It's too much. Really. I don't have the money to pay you back." He smiled at her with disarming gentleness. "It's not a gift," he said in a calm, measured, almost fatherly voice. "It's a trade. You let me buy you breakfast, and in return, you let me have a good time in the company of real people." He looked at the 2 little girls, who didn't even dare touch the offered buns, as if they would disappear at any moment. "I don't often see faces like yours in this shop. And that's a shame." His words were simple. But they carried an invisible weight. A weight made of years, of hurts, of memories. Because Mason Reed, this man with the kind gaze, wasn't born rich. He grew up on the streets, in shelters, without parents or points of reference. He knew what it was like to be hungry. To feel like an outsider in a place that was too beautiful. He also knew that sometimes, a single gesture could reignite a whole life. Grace felt her eyes fill with tears. She tried to hold them back, but her throat tightened. There was no pity or condescension in this man's words. Just tenderness. And respect. So she accepted. Not without tears. Around a small wooden table, away from the hustle and bustle of the bakery, a gentle atmosphere settled. The comforting scent of hot coffee rose in the air, mingling with that of hot chocolate, specially prepared for the two little girls. Emily and Chloe, silent, sipped their cups and warmed their hands. Mason watched Grace for a moment, his eyes resting on her with a discreet but profound kindness. He broke the silence. "What do you do for a living, Grace?" His voice was calm, warm, and non-judgmental. Grace looked down, playing with her cup, then answered in a shaky but honest voice. "I do housework, 3 part-time jobs to make ends meet." She took a deep breath, as if to gather her courage. "I take care of my daughters alone. Their father died 3 years ago in a workplace accident." She paused, her gaze lost for a moment in the steam rising from the cup. "Sometimes I dream of something else. Of a different life. But, we do what we can. We move forward as best we can." Mason nodded slowly, looking attentive. "And what was your dream, Grace?" He looked at her gently, as if he wanted her to dare to allow herself to believe it. She hesitated, biting her lower lip, then whispered barely audibly. "Open a small pastry shop." A faint, sad smile split his lips. "I loved baking when I was younger. I loved mixing the ingredients, smelling the vanilla and cinnamon. But now, I don't have the time, and I can't afford to train or buy a proper oven." A silence fell, thick with unspoken emotion. Mason reached into the inside pocket of his coat and pulled out a business card. "Tomorrow morning, come here," he said, handing her the card with a smile full of promise. "It's a training center that I personally support. There you'll find free training in artisanal pastry making." He gestured towards the little ones. "They also offer childcare while you learn." Then he concludes, his voice full of seriousness but hope. "And if you complete the program, a position will be waiting for you in one of our bakeries." Grace's eyes widened, as if to make sure what she was hearing was real. A flicker of disbelief mixed with a spark of hope was dawning in her eyes. "Why, me?" His voice was trembling, charged with emotion. Mason smiled at him, with the tenderness reserved for wounded but worthy souls. "Because a long time ago, a woman reached out to me when I was homeless." He looked down, as if searching through his memories. "She gave me bread, without expecting anything in return." He looked up, searching Grace's eyes. "I promised myself that if one day I had the means, would return this gesture." Then, quietly, he added, "Today, it's my turn." Grace felt tears well up in her eyes. This wasn't pity. It was a genuine, human gesture, a helping hand in the middle of winter. For the first time in a long time, she allowed herself to dream again. The next morning, as the sun was barely rising over Detroit, Grace Turner clutched Mason's card in her hand, like a talisman against doubt. The training center was housed in a modest but welcoming building, nestled in a working-class neighborhood where the faces spoke of struggle and hope. As soon as she walked through the door, she was enveloped in a new atmosphere, human warmth, genuine smiles, and a gentle but determined energy. The staff welcomed her warmly, caring for her daughters Emily and Chloe, who were placed in a bright, colorful, toy-filled nursery, a safe haven where they could laugh and learn while their mother recovered. Grace, for the first time in a long time, no longer felt alone. Every day, she discovered the secrets of artisanal baking, the texture of the dough between her fingers, the magic of the rising yeast, the intoxicating smell of warm bread fresh from the oven. She learned to measure precisely, to work with patience and love. But even more, she learned to trust herself. The next 6 months were a mixture of struggle, doubt, and small victories. Grace rose in the morning not to escape poverty, but to build a future. Her eyes brightened, and her once tired hands regained the vigor and grace of an artist. Every night, she returned to her daughters with a new smile, a story to tell, and the pride of feeling she was making progress. Emily and Chloe spoke enthusiastically about their days at daycare, and their mother knew that this stability was a priceless treasure. When his internship came to an end, a position awaited him at a bakery in the same neighborhood. This modest bakery, nestled between a cafe and a small bookstore, soon became his second home. Grace poured her heart into it. Every loaf she shaped bore the mark of her efforts, each fragrant brioche telling a story of resilience. She worked with a genuine smile, without arrogance, but with a quiet confidence that charmed customers. Little by little, they returned. Attracted at first by the quality of the bread, they stayed for the warm welcome, for that rare human contact. Grace had succeeded in conveying in her creations the gentleness and strength of a woman who had lost everything, but who never gave up. The neighborhood seemed to change with her. A simple gesture, a smile, a shared loaf of bread, so many small miracles that gave everyone hope for a better tomorrow. Exactly 1 year after their meeting in that bakery filled with the scent of hope, Mason Reed pushed open the door of Payne Door. The place had changed, as if transformed by a gentle but determined hand. The facade had been renovated, and a sleek new logo adorned the window. Le Payne Door, managed by Grace Turner. This simple inscription carried all the power of an intimate victory, of a dream fulfilled. Mason scanned the room. There, behind the counter, stood Grace, beaming. More confident, serene, she smiled at the customers with natural warmth, without any trace of the former weight that had weighed down her shoulders. Her hands, expert and delicate, shaped the loaves with a grace born of a newfound passion. In the background, near a table bathed in sunlight filtering through the window, Emily was reading a book, absorbed in a story she couldn't seem to tear her eyes away from. Beside her, Chloe was carefully wrapping cookies, focused and proud to participate, as if she understood the importance of every little gesture. Their eyes met. Grace looked up, met Mason's gaze, and offered him a smile, soft and grateful. Mason nodded slowly, wordlessly. He knew everything had been said, everything had been accomplished. A few months later, Grace announced the launch of Le Payne Partage, a project close to her heart. Inspired by the generosity that had changed her life, she wanted to give back to the community what she had received. Every evening, unsold goods from local bakeries were collected and redistributed to struggling families. This simple yet meaningful gesture brought tangible relief to dozens of households. Grace also hired several women from similar backgrounds to hers, single mothers, formerly homeless people, or young people in rehabilitation, offering them employment, training, and above all, restored dignity. The program grew in size and quickly spread to several disadvantaged neighborhoods in the city. A virtuous circle was set in motion, driven by the quiet strength of a woman who had learned to transform pain into hope. One day, during a press conference where he was invited to talk about the philanthropic initiatives he supported, a journalist dared to ask him, "Mr. Reed, why did you choose to help that unknown woman, Grace Turner, a year ago? Why invest time and money in one person rather than in broader efforts?" Mason smiled, gazing into the distance, as if the answer came from his most precious memories. Because sometimes, offering bread to a mother is much more than just giving food. He paused, filled with emotion. It's giving him back his dignity. A silence fell over the room. And with dignity, she can rebuild everything. He added simply, like an oath. All. This story is a tribute to the strength of women, the power of small gestures, and the beauty of shared hope.